Hello, I'm Brigantia Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Monday and welcome to Norse Studies Week 16. The hour has come. We are going to delve into the book that had me heading into the hills and running away from Norse Germanic spirituality for years and years. And this is it. The title of the rather dubious tome is Germanic Heathenry, A Practical Guide by James Yuka Coulter, circa 2003. I originally bought this book for the purpose of exploring my roots a little bit. It was my mother's family that immigrated to the United States in the 1880s, and they came from an area that was known as Prussia, Germany. At least that's what it was called at the time. You know, we've had a couple of world wars and a little bit of rearrangement since then. But in addition to that being feeling very far away and a different language and everything else, there's also the issue of I never really connected to my mother or her side of the family very well, and I really recoiled from her heritage. Mostly because I had a lot of difficulties getting along with her. So taking a look at Germanic heathenry was one of my first real attempts to get beyond all of that, my prejudices, childhood issues, all of that. And I was really looking for something of my heritage and potentially my spirituality that I could genuinely connect with, regardless of any personal issues I had with mom or her side of the family. Now, I wish that I had chosen a different book to read, or at least that I had, or if I had gone through a completely different avenue to, explore my cultural and spiritual side of things. So this book really became an obstacle rather than a helpful resource. But that being admitted, I think it's important to cultivate enough self-discipline to look at material that you don't automatically flow well with and to learn how to look past the inadequacies of an author's writing style. Because just because someone sucks at communicating, it doesn't mean that they don't have information that's worthy of being conveyed or that they don't have any insights to share. So it is in this spirit that I am approaching this book now. And this is not going to be a redemption story for the text or for the author, but it is an exercise in shifting through rubbish in order to look for something worthwhile. So we will begin with the foreword of this book. It was written by an individual named C. Dean Anderson. His first three paragraphs focused upon the word demoniac in the Greek sense of the term, which refers to supernatural powers, as opposed to the more anglicized term that refers to diabolical ones and devilry and all that other nonsense. But the reason why the person who wrote the foreword brought this up at all is he said it reminded him of Odin's quest for wisdom and what he was willing to do to gain it, having to fully tap into that supernatural side of things. And then what followed from there was 7 rather glowing paragraphs about how wonderful the author is and how handy this book will be. Anderson wrote, Coulter's book contains practical information that can be read, used, and enjoyed by anyone with the will and desire to learn and understand, but it is unlike any other book on Northern lore and Germanic heathenry I have previously read. The breadth and depth of the research and knowledge Coulter brings to bear is extensive and impressive. The glossary alone makes it worthy of serious attention. I would compare this book to others on the subject as an advanced college course to a junior high introduction. Okay. So I bring this quote to your attention because I do think this sets the tone for the entire book. The book takes what it believes to be a very academic approach, and there is a limit to how useful that mindset can really be in a spiritual context, because spirituality and religion is about how we live our lives and why, but academia is more about research and seeking to either substantiate or to debunk theories. So take this as the first clue that the book is not going to be as useful as what Anderson has tried to persuade us it will be. And then after that, we have the introduction, which goes on for 10 pages to convey information that could have easily been condensed to 3 pages at most. The author spent those 3 pages alone establishing that the term ermine is the cognate of Yggdrasil. That's a lot of wasted words. And the result is that the larger point that the author was trying to make is that Germanic heathenry must be a living, breathing religion to provide real value gets completely obscured. I mean, sometimes more explanation isn't better. Sometimes it's just more, which is why when I do my own teaching videos, which are the Wicca 101 and the Wicca 202 series, it has videos that are small, digestible chunks of information that provide a baseline of knowledge that the student can then build on, with more focus on details details and nuance as the student has got the basics down, because it's supposed to be simple at first. You're supposed to be giving a foundation. And never forget, the purpose of language is to communicate. Communicate usefully, not just blah, blah, blah. And Coulter in this book is doing the exact opposite of this in his introduction. And what's worse is that the only thing he really is communicating at this point is just a rather pompous opinion of his own intellect, rather than spiritual information that the reader can apply in their own lives. That is such a huge problem because it completely defeats the goal of what he is trying to achieve, and it betrays the author's insecurity. And he's not alone in this particular insecurity. There's a lot of pagans I've come across, either in conversation or in books, that share the sense of vulnerability, and they have an exaggerated need to prove themselves and to legitimize their form of religion, not in the eyes of the gods or even in the eyes of other pagans. It's a quest to justify themselves to non-pagans. It's begging, please take me seriously. But people do not get a seat at the table in any context of the metaphor by begging for it or by groveling for the approval of others. You do not gain acceptance by playing those kinds of games. It just smacks of desperation, and a desperate person does not command respect. End of story. So, on that dubious note, we have Chapter 1, which is titled Family and Kindred. Now, this chapter, I have to admit, it does begin very strongly. It contrasts the ideal family life with the reality that we're frequently confronted with. The author also brings up how socialistic government programs have sought to replace the function of family, and it properly condemns the practice and the thought process that got those travesties brought into being. So I can't praise the author enough for highlighting how this mentality of government should be involved in everything is a fundamental contradiction of pagan principles. I have to give the author credit for that. And for that reason, the book will always remain on my bookshelf, even if it never becomes one of my go-tos. Then the author went on to stress that blaming external factors for the disgraceful behavior of children is an attempt of parents to avoid blaming themselves, because either they couldn't or they wouldn't raise decent children. And in all probability, the parents have fallen into the trap of prioritizing their own desires and ambitions over their children to catastrophic result. And every day it seems we observe the consequences of family not being prioritized. And there's a need for people in general to rediscover a sense of duty towards caring for their own flesh and blood. Because if families are peaceable and in good order, that in turn has a good effect upon broader society and in turn the civilization as a whole. So this is not a small thing. Then Coulter spends a few pages describing the detrimental effects of technology and that the internet has had on human society, the overemphasis on our various screens, breaking down our ability and our willingness to engage with other human beings in a meaningful way. Now, again, I want to bring up to your attention that this book was copyrighted in 2003, and this was before we had the onslaught of social media, and we had no idea the consequences that would bring. So I would be legitimately curious to know what the author thinks of our social media world and what it's brought about. But more importantly, Coulter reiterates the need for each individual practitioner to take full responsibility for themselves and their families, which includes raising children against a pagan religious backdrop. Now, many pagans, including myself, have had very bad past experiences with religions our parents raised us in, and it's not at all uncommon to encounter a pagan parent who's raising their children completely outside of spirituality for fear of damaging them. I would like to suggest that this is a response to undealt with trauma. It has been the normal thing throughout human history for parents to teach children their worldview and their religious practices. Now, in this day and age, I think we've all come around to the idea that upon reaching adulthood, it is for the child to determine what spiritual path they ultimately follow. But I think that pagans would benefit from re-embracing the idea that it's okay and it is their duty as parents to provide spiritual instruction for their children. Because if we can identify and practice pagan virtues for ourselves, then it would only make sense for us to want to instill those values into the children. Because to do otherwise is to deprive them of the benefits of these ideas and behaviors that we have known have had such a good effect upon ourselves. And also, now that we have seen an increasing number of children being raised without any real defined religion and how they've turned out, I think there is a real argument to be made that it's much more damaging to raise children without religion than with it. Now, after describing the necessity of family, Coulter then decides to define what family is. This is not the first nor the last time in which he has put the cart before the horse. I do think that this is a little backwards. Shouldn't we define the terms and how we're using them and then make a case for the concept and the necessity that those terms represent? Maybe it's just me. Now, unfortunately, this passage and the following passages that define family and kindred, it drags on for pages and pages when it could be defined and summarized in less than 3 paragraphs. My attention doesn't just wander when the author indulges in this nonsense, but I also find myself growing actively hostile towards the author's approach because he's so busy intellectualizing that he destroys the point he's attempting to make. This is an ongoing weakness in the text, and it's one that his editor should have sharply corrected him on, because it is easy to turn spiritual explorations into an academic exercise, but the more people do that, the less benefit they actually derive from the spiritual part. And because paganism is about how we live our lives and how we interact with every aspect of the world, from the ground we stand upon, the resources we use to survive, our relationship with our ancestors, the land spirits, and the gods, that is the true heart of the matter. So I think it's worth asking ourselves if our methods of self-instruction are actually getting us closer to that heart. So that's about all I can stomach for right now. Next week, we will look at Chapter 2, The House and Household, and we will be discussing both the strengths and weaknesses of that chapter. But for now, I'm going to have a nice cup of tea to soothe my nerves, and you can let me know what you think in the comments section below, or you could click on the link in the description box and come pay us a visit on Gilded and further on the conversation there. So I look forward to hearing from you, and I will see you next time. Bye.